Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I was
Yes.
like,
Yay.
hit the button. Yay! Okay. Yeah, I'm excited. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'm really excited to talk to Mike about melancholy and considering that it's in the transits right now, it's very timely.
True.
Yeah, so for any of you who don't know my chart, I have a lot of melancholy in my chart. I have 12, 22, 39, 55, 10, 20, and 20, 38. So I feel like most analysts that look at my chart, that's the first thing they ask me about is, how are you handling all of these moods? I heard Mike's YouTube talk about this, I think it was a couple months ago, posted on Jonah's channel, and it just sparked so much for me and helped me understand myself in such a different way. And I feel like Mike articulated a lot of what I've experienced my whole life and just haven't been able to put into words.
Ah, shucks. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. I feel like one of the major things that talk helped me to lean into more was just seeing how melancholy isn't a bad thing. I feel like my mind had made it into something like something's wrong with me when I'm in these moods and when I'm very particular and, shifting into different things to try to find what fits my mood. And I think in the past, I've looked at some of my melancholy as, well, that thing worked in the past. So why doesn't it work this time? Because you're kind of trying to figure out what exactly you need to lean into in those moments. And I remember recently I went through a painting phase where I was in a mutation and I was in melancholy and I was painting for like 8 hours a day. And it was just scratching that itch for me. And then it just went away when the mutation was complete. And I'm like, why don't I like painting anymore? Why can't I get back into this? And then when the next melancholy hits, I it's like that same thing didn't work. So I feel like it gave me such a permission slip just to try different things. And you had said something about how, we romanticize certain things in melancholy, like painting or art or whatever, but then we don't just allow ourselves to do the dishes or sweep or whatever it is that our body is wanting in that moment. So I started really just being more open-minded to leaning into what my body wanted to do. And yeah, sometimes it is like sweeping the house is what's really scratching that itch for the melancholy for some reason. And I feel like I used to judge whatever it was that I needed to do. So it just opened a lot of doors for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm kind of starting to break it down into three rules of what not to do, and one of them is try to explain it. It's like explaining it, rushing it, or asking it to be different, and I forget what the third one is. Maybe something about, or maybe the asking it to be different is kind of the third one, or like not betraying it, only doing things that you're in the mood for.
Yeah, that's helped me a lot. Just when it comes to, I've noticed certain themes when I'm in melancholy that tend to make it more painful, I guess, or contribute to the suffering. Which you had mentioned something like that as well. How if you don't just lean into it and let it be what it is, then that's where it contributes to a more like a suffering process instead of kind of relishing in it and enjoying the mutation process. And for me, like I grew up having disordered eating tendencies, which I know is really common with 3955. And I think growing up in the 90s, the whole health craze and all of that, I would judge what I was craving in a certain mood and be like, oh, that's not healthy. You shouldn't have that or whatever. And my relationship to food changed so much over the last couple of years, mostly because I would just allow myself to have whatever I wanted when I was in a certain mood or in that melancholic, like I need this very specific thing to scratch this itch. Whereas I think, I've talked to a lot of 3955s about binge eating and how they will just want to be like eating to fill the emptiness or fill the void because of that melancholy over feeling empty in the 55. And I'm sure we could do that with love and relationships as well. But I've noticed how in the past I would binge when I wasn't allowing myself to have what I was craving. And it was like resisting the melancholy, resisting the mutation because I was going away from the thing that I actually needed. And so I feel like food is just such a tangible thing to experiment with when it comes to melancholy, especially if you have that 3955, because it's such a big part of that, especially like sugar and sweets and that sort of stuff. So that's something I've noticed as of lately, how when I just eat what I'm craving, it like completes, and I'm not binging or stressing about it or thinking about it too much.
Yay, that makes sense. It's funny to like look at this like in a super materialist way too, because it's like food is such an obvious way to assist mutation. If there's like, you're craving certain stuff because there's certain things that the body wants to do or whatever to make sure that its mutation is successful, to fill it with the right nutrients or chemicals or whatever. But probably even like the subtler stuff, like just being in the right environment, like our bodies, we know, are chemically taking in the environment too, So it's like, so it's like when us sitting in a certain place is really bugging us, maybe it has something to do with the air that we're breathing in that place, or all these other subtler forms of like integrating the Maya into the body.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I notice that a lot because I'm also very acoustic. Um, I notice that a lot at my job. I work at this restaurant a couple days a week, and they play the same music all the time. And they've been
Boo.
open for like 10 years, and they play the same Pandora station. And it drives me crazy, especially when I'm in a mutation or in melancholy. And my coworkers don't seem to understand. Like, I just will, I probably sound really complainy, but I'm like, I just can't. It's like nails on a chalkboard to me right now. This is not the sound I want to hear. And then having to work in it too. So, yeah, there's very specific things. And then I almost seem like I come across as just a very particular person, which with as many melancholic channels as I have, it makes sense that I feel very particular. But I've almost had to integrate that and get over it as just in interpersonal relationships in those types of places, because um, it's like I don't want to seem difficult, but I'm actually kind of a difficult person when I'm really being true to myself in those moods.
Mm. So what do you say to other people when they're so not in the mood to go to work, and they're in the experiment, let's say, and they know human design, and that you're close to them, emotionally close to them, and you see them in that situation? What do you find yourself saying?
That's such a tough one, I feel like, and it's something that I've had to grapple with myself because I've definitely been in those moments where I'm not in the mood to go to work, and I can tell other people aren't in the mood to be there. Um, yeah, I feel like just setting up your work environment as best you can. Like for me, I mean, I've convinced my owners to add like another station. Like sometimes I'll just go see if I can turn on the other station, and I don't know. I feel like it's not holding yourself to the same standards as you normally would when you're not in that state, because I can't just not go to work. Like I'll lose my job if I do that. So I think it's for me just setting up that environment to where it can be more supportive of my melancholy.
Building an asylum in the workplace.
Yes.
People gotta take one of these unused cubicles or office rooms or whatever and make a damn fort in there.
Right, exactly. It's like, what is possible in that space for you? How can you make it your own? How can you make it inviting for your melancholy versus just throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah, and it always is, other people that are going to arrest the mutation the most. So if you can find any way to like go be alone during a melancholic episode at work, that's probably, goes as far as anything.
Oh yeah, we have an employee bathroom at my work, and I've cried in that bathroom too many times to count at this point.
I have a bunch of other questions for you about your chart specifically and your
Yeah,
experience of melancholy.
I'd love
Well,
to hear.
um, so first of all, like, do you experience like the 13, 55, 22, 12 as like a full continuity? Like, do you consider that to be one wave, or are those separate waves?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, I feel like I can feel the difference between them, but they do kind of blend in. So with the 1222, what I notice the most about that one is just how social I am when it's up. and how much I want to talk. I'm like a chatterbox when that wave is up. Um, versus the 3955 feels more adrenalized when it's up. It feels like I want to go move my body. I want to dance. I want to do something physical to release that, or even just get out of the house and explore. It's more of like this adrenalized push, whereas the 1222 just feels a lot more social, where it's like I want to be around people. I want to talk to a friend. I want to express myself. I have a podcast and I tend to record those episodes when I'm up because it's just, I need to talk when I'm in that space.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Famously social, right? The most beloved individual channel by the tribe, right? Is the 2212. People love to hear it.
right. Yes, people love to hear it. And it's great because when I'm up and I'm in that space, I love to express and I love to have an audience. So,
Looks like Christine in the chat is asking about your 59.6. And I also do, I'm also just curious for people that have melancholy attached to the wave and those other emotional channels you have, whether the highs and lows of the wave always come with melancholy, whether those are like, could a mutation, well, we could get to Christine's question first, because I could get a little more specific about my question, and I'm just finding it relating to a couple other things too. So,
yeah.
but I just,
Yeah.
and because also just like with, and keeping in mind the audience or whatever, and just like people's, I think everyone kind of cleaves apart or learns to cleave apart the like low end of the wave from melancholy, depending on how those things are defined in their own charts. But just like conceptually, when people get into human design and start to consider like a low wave being a different thing from melancholy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was something in your talk that helped me a lot too, because I didn't really notice the difference consciously before. And then I started going through it with awareness of, yeah, my low is just a general low energy and disinterest in everything. And how you had said when you're in melancholy, you could still have energy. And it's just that you're very specific and kind of irritated by things that are not the specific thing that you need. So I started paying attention to that, and it's very different. It's a very different feeling because I feel like when I'm in melancholy, I'm almost searching for something. I'm searching for the thing that's going to scratch the itch. And sometimes I can have a lot of energy while I'm on the search for that. Like if I have a specific craving, I'm going to go try to find it. I'm going to go try to make it happen now. Whereas in a low, it just feels like I have no energy to do anything and I'm disinterested in life pretty much.
Mm.
Yeah, and
And
the question about the 59.6, is there something specific that you wanted to know, Christine, about that? Just like what it feels like, or?
maybe that question was probably posed shortly after you sort of making distinct your 3955 from your 2212, and I would assume that she's probably just wondering how that fits into the aggregate of the circuit of the emotional circuitry that you have.
Yeah, it's hard for me to differentiate. I mean, that one's completely unconscious for me, so it does feel like it's more of a body thing. I will notice, and this is something James Alexander's kind of helped me with as well, is noticing what specific triggers I have. And although the wave is just a chemistry that's moving along, of course, I notice there are times where I do get like a spike of energy there, or like an outside situation that kind of sets a wave off, or that's what it feels like to me. And with the 59.6, it's tribal, so it typically is like friction in my interpersonal relationships, or sometimes it's feeling a lack of intimacy in my relationships will kind of set that off. And if I'm in a low, I could really kind of dwell on that and be like, oh, do I not have intimacy in my relationships? Do people not trust me? And when there's conflict or friction, it kind of sets off a whole thing for me to start processing, and I have to, you know, move through that in my own way. And then also having closure or conversation with the person that there might be friction with becomes really important to me, like when the timing is right.
Mm. Do you have the chat open here where you're getting a whole bunch of kind of interesting questions and people are kind
Yeah.
of debating things among themselves?
Yes, absolutely.
You're seeing all that?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay. Very active chat for this
Yeah, I love
discussion.
it. I'm here for it. Yeah, and just to differentiate what Mark had said, melancholy is individual, so I don't want the 59.6 to get lumped into that. It's definitely tribal.
So you do have 4 individual channels, right? Are you able to get a sense of when one channel in particular might be mutating? Do you experience different kinds of melancholy that you can link together by category like that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, that chart that I think Christine shared,
Mm.
that was really helpful because that actually just laid it all out for me, so I could read it and be like, "Oh my gosh, everything makes sense now." Because before I really knew what was happening, I would call it like an existential crisis because it felt to me like I was having some sort of meltdown. And yeah, that could be amplified by my emotions and stuff, but it would be around very specific things. And so the 2838 and like life is devoid of purpose and not knowing what to fight for, I've noticed that melancholy, what that feels like is it's like I will start questioning all of my life decisions and wondering why I'm not fighting for something right now or why I'm not struggling for something. And when I'm in the midst of building something and struggling and fighting for something, it's like there's almost a really what's the word I'm looking for? There's like an adrenaline that comes with that, like a rush.
Mm.
And I've been through different phases of my life where I've been actively like fighting for something and having this meaning in my life. And then, life just changes and we move on to something else and whatever. And then it just feels like I'm waiting for something else to come along to fight for. And so I feel like when I go into that melancholy, my mind kind of can have a heyday with that of like, this is why you're in this space because you don't have anything worth fighting for. And so
Mm.
it's really interesting to listen to the mental chatter because it doesn't really matter, right? But I yeah, I just it's more that I witness my mind in those spaces and what conclusions it's drawing based upon my melancholy. And with the channel of struggle, I will like my mind will tell me I need to change a bunch of things, or it's almost like it's wanting me to create struggle to get me out of that melancholy versus just
Mm.
allowing the mutation to happen. And I think that's where for somebody like me, it's so important to be tuned into my emotional authority and not making any of these life-changing decisions because I'm in a space of melancholy and I'm trying to scratch that itch somehow according to my mind.
Mm. It's kind of interesting to see that channel as like a parallel of the 3955 and earlier when you're talking about like eating to fill a void or whatever. I feel like sometimes the channel of struggle can be like doing to fill a void, like something like straining yourself towards improving something, straining yourself toward like filling an external void with activity or something. What? Because like when you're feeling void of meaning, it's like, well, I got to put this like fight energy somewhere.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's interesting having both of those channels that mirror each other and kind of feeling some similarities, also major differences. But yeah, it's like it's trying to get me to be in some sort of struggle. It's like you need something to fight for.
Can I just keep asking questions?
Yeah, go for it.
I kind of gave up on following the chat because it was hard to like read while listening to you. Sorry, chat. Um, so, uh, so you know that thing about like, so like melancholic episodes definitely make you like more internal, right? You're like more self preoccupied, more like introspective. Like, do you first of all, do you find that to be true?
Yes, absolutely. I find that I just don't want to be around people a lot of the time. And my schedule as it is now, like I only work 2 days a week at this restaurant. And so it kind of works perfectly because it gets me out of the house and gets me doing something. But for the rest of the week, I'm really keeping to myself and I'm able to kind of tend to my moods and, make my own schedule with my clients and whatnot. And switching to a schedule like that, I mean, obviously that's kind of a luxury. I didn't used to have a schedule like this pre 2020, but I've noticed it's opened up so much more space for me to be by myself in that melancholy and be antisocial and not feel bad about it.
Mm. And that so in my case, like all my experiences of melancholy that belong to me, at least that are like native to my circuitry, none of those involve the throat. So I'm also curious, just this process, especially because you know that one throat channel specifically that you have is so much about opening up or not. Do you find that when acute melancholy strikes, there are certain things that you are able to talk about still? Because for me, a bit like my experience of melancholy and like the antisocialness that comes with it is like it's really excruciating to talk about. In a way, maybe this is like 6124, really hard to talk about things that like aren't true. Like I can't stand a conversation where you people have to like contrive answers and have good enough, true enough answers or talk about things they don't know about, right? Because I guess it's betraying that sort of like gate of inner truth with that. But
Mm.
but it's like, and I can think that I just don't want to like talk at all to anybody. Like it feels like no subject on there under the sun could capture my attention. But just like with everything else in melancholy, sometimes it's just super, super specific. And like the closer to talking about myself as I can get, like the easier I find it to express. And sometimes in a state of melancholy, I'll like surprise myself with how much I have to share and how much I'm lit up when I'm able to talk about something that I know to be true, which is my state of melancholy, right? And when you're in
Yes.
melancholy, it's like that's one of the things that you can appreciate is where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking that at first because sometimes when I'm in melancholy, it just feels like I have no voice and like you said, it's painful to talk or my voice is just shut down. But I've experienced it before. Maybe this is being a fourth line and having the right people in my network where let's say I'll wake up in melancholy and I'm kind of just like I barely have said a word and the day's half over or whatever. And then the right person will call me or reach out to me and they'll ask me the right question and it just opens something up, and then like you said, I'm able to talk about my melancholy, talk about what's going on. Um, yeah, it just seems like it's like everything else with melancholy is very specific. And I just get, it's almost like it's depleting or exhausting to talk about whatever is not specific.
Mm. What's unspecific? That's really interesting. Yeah. Specific to your mood, you mean?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Like
Mm.
whatever, if I have to talk, like let's say I'm at work when I'm in melancholy, I have to talk about something that is not specific. It's like it's hard to get it out. I feel like my voice is suppressed almost or shut down.
Mm. Oh, we did had a question in the chat pointed out to us again. Is the experience of melancholy different between hanging gates versus channels?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you had talked a little bit about that in your talk, how it can feel when you have the hanging gate, and it was either if you're compromised in that channel with somebody, or if there's a electromagnetic and what that can feel like. Um, I would imagine that it would depend on if it was coming off of a defined or an undefined center too, like how often you experience that. Do you think that would be the case?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. How familiar are you with that kind of melancholy? Because it's like you're more likely to surprise yourself with a mood if that mood is not something that you're carrying around in some form all the time. Like when melancholy strikes and you have the mood and you know that the mutation's happening under the surface, it's still like kind of in your wheelhouse when it's part of your circuitry, when it's part of a complete channel.
Yeah.
But like, it's really clear to me when I'm getting a melancholy inspired by a transit or an aura that's where it's just I don't have a hanging gate there at all. Like that prolonged 63 transit to me really stood out as just a type of melancholy that I was not used to.
Yes, yeah. It's interesting because with as much melancholy as I have, that kind of stuff can still really throw me off because it feels so different to what I'm used to. So the 63 transit, it just felt like kind of moving through sludge or it almost brought up more for my mind to think about, and like, why isn't anything happening? Why am I so bored all the time? um,
Mm.
yeah, it's almost like very obvious. It almost clouds my regular melancholy that I feel, because that's just normally a part of my process and I'm used to it. But when something new comes in, you notice it in other people a lot too. It's like it's kind of a topic of conversation with people.
Mm. I'm curious about this keynote for the Melancholy of Gate 20, discomfort with the world as it is now.
Yeah, I was looking at that earlier on Nathan's chart, and it that feels very appropriate. I feel like if I'm in melancholy in that in the gate 20, I'm kind of looking around, and I'm also, I'm personal view, so I can transfer to power view too and be seeing the power dynamics or that are that don't feel fair to me, and wanting something to change. I mean, especially with what's going on right now in the world, and I can just see how it's like a sadness about why
Mm.
things are the way that they are, and wishing that things were different, and wishing that we could be more in the future and things would be mutating, versus sitting with the discomfort of what's actually happening in the present.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely associate that theme with the 5720 specifically. It's interesting. So you've got the 1020, and that's not known to be an existential channel in the same way, right? As being part of integration, it's being existential instead of thinking about existential things or whatever, as the 5720 might.
Yeah.
Um, but the like it's interesting that just that phrase, discomfort with the world as it is now, because there's the world that you're talking about, that you absorb through inference. You hear about the world out there, you see evidence of the world out there, like things happening in other places and whatnot. But there's also the world as it is now, that's like literally in your now, like around you, right? And do you feel that when your 1020 melancholy strikes up, that it's very like I don't know, immediate, in your face or in the room with you somehow?
Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah, because I was thinking while you were talking, there's the world at large, and then there's my own world. And I just remember being a little kid, and like complaining about boredom was the thing I complained about the most. And um, I feel like because gate 20 is about being present, I can tend to not be present. And when I'm not being present, that's when I notice I have a problem with it. Like if I'm just
Mm.
like, oh, I wish it were different right now. I wish I was doing something else or talking to somebody or whatever it is. It's like my mind is
Mm.
looking for problems in my world, in my present
Mm.
awareness. And then it's like that's where dissociation can come in, or where I'm just trying to distract myself and um, change my present moment.
Wow, like I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah, yeah,
Whoa.
totally. Yeah. And then I wonder with the gate 10, because it's melancholy that no one else knows how to behave. And I also have that in the sixth line. I mean, that's something, 10.6, we can be hypocrites. We can, um, I wonder too, because I can, kind of swing from self-love to self-hate. And that's seems like a character arc that those of us with that defined in our charts go through. Um, but
Mm.
yeah, it's almost like having a problem with my own behavior sometimes. Like, why am I behaving this way? Why am I not behaving differently, as well as other people's behavior?
Mm. Yeah, it makes sense. The gate of self-love would also be the gate of self-hatred.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I kind of want to deep dive on individual versus integration some more, but there's a lot of good questions in the comments, and we might lose them if we don't get to them. So do you mind if I just kind
Okay.
of go in order here?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Amanda asks or says, I relate to a lot of what you're saying regarding moodiness slash pickiness. Of course, I have no channels, but a 12 design sun, 61, 23, and 38, and 60 to 3 was a trip as well. Oh yeah, reflector talking about the transit, of course. Nice. So
Oh
that's,
yeah.
yeah, moodiness, pickiness. Jonah says, and Nathan's keynoting 60 is melancholy of having nowhere to go, and 3 is melancholy of nothing everlasting. Whoa, that's interesting.
Mm.
So an interesting perspective of the 60 to 3 transit we just went through for the past 3 months as well. Good point, Jonah. Uh, so I like started reading these. I thought they were questions, and then sometimes they're just observations. Some
Which are great
insightful observations
observations.
here. They are. They are. I want to read Ashley's too. Let's see. It says, with just one individual channel, the 3828, I feel like most of my life I'm melancholic/sad. But honestly, the big breakthrough has been learning to enjoy it. Basically, not just channeling it because it can be utilized in everything I do, but just savoring the sadness. Courting the muse, I guess, is how Ra put it. She also
Well
says
done.
that, yeah, that's a really good line, courting the muse.
Mm.
She also says that she thinks the biggest deconditioning has been assuming people would find it unpleasant to be around her melancholy, but that's just not true. I guess it itself is mutated for people. Yeah, it is. Like, it's hard not to think that when you're like deep in a melancholy because you're so antisocial, like it's very, very easy to just feel like a pill. And why would anyone want to hang out with me? Like when you're deep in a mood. And sometimes I feel like I get reinforcement from that. Sometimes I think my heaviness and my melancholic state can be legitimately uninvited, and it's not just um my black holeness that's telling me that. But then you can really be surprised at how receptive the right people are at the right time to the mutation.
Yeah, totally. Especially when you're just owning it and like stating it versus just sitting in the energy of it. I think it can be refreshing for people when you're just like, oh, I'm just in a mood today and
Mm.
that's what it is. And some people, I think the thing I experience the most is people will be like, oh, I'm sorry, or well, what's wrong? What happened? And I'm like, nothing. It's just my state of being right now. And I think if I'm in a certain mood, that can be really annoying to get that from people because it's almost reinforcing what my mind latches onto, that there's something wrong with me. But I think I've gotten to a point where I'm just comfortable owning it. And I just know that people just don't always understand it. And that's their first instinct is just to want to apologize for like, because they feel like you're complaining about it when you're just saying it versus like, it's like, oh, you want sympathy from me and that's why you're saying this. Like, no, I'm not. I'm just being honest of where I'm at right now.
That's so real. That's so true. It's clear at the time too that that's like one of the most valuable things you can do for yourself. Like the effect of it is like pretty immediate when you start talking about your mood. And it doesn't necessarily have to be venting or even grieving really. It's like just speaking to the truth of the mood and all the, unpleasantness that might contain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like this is the kind of discomfort that I'm experiencing right now, but I'm also very accepting of it.
Right. Yeah, it's like fleshing it out, and it's easier to accept it when you give words to it. It's like
Yeah.
the sort of catharsis effect kind of happens immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many good comments here.
Yeah, I'm loving the conversation in the chat. Yeah, Jonah was saying I've got the most glowing feedback from talks I've given in the darkest mood. People pick up on the authenticity. It's a vibration. It is. And I think I've heard some of your talks when you've been in a mood, Jonah. It's like there's almost a broodiness to it. And I think that's where the savoring it comes in. It's like anything you could say could sound like art or poetry or whatever because there's that vibration behind it. And I really enjoy that when I hear it in other people because it feels like homey to me. It feels like something I'm really familiar with.
Yeah, it's interesting. So earlier you talked about something from my talk about the sort of like universality of the low wave as distinct from melancholy, because it's like again melancholy has this specificity and like you can be so down on so many things, but a few things you'll be really up on. Whereas like a low wave is just sort of a blanket effect, little bit down on everything. And with the emotional wave, like the clarity and the coherence of both the high energy state and the low energy state or whatever is can be tuned into, can be brought into. It's like correct tuning. When you're following strategy and authority, obviously, when you're living according to your own pace of life and following your wave, it kind of gets to take its correct shape. And so what I find also with a low energy emotional state as distinct from melancholy is that if you're like in a clean low, like people across the board are like gonna appreciate that. There people like not totally, but like so many people are gonna respond to like a healthy low emotional wave as like this moment of you know contemplation or pathos or like that weird meeting between like beauty and tragedy and stuff like that. People can read that in your low wave when you're living correctly, but the low but the melancholy, when the melancholy strikes and you're antisocial, again, it's like selective. And that thing about like, maybe being self-conscious about who is going to be receptive to this mutation. Well, like, of course it is only going to be certain people, because just as the mood is like self-selecting, people are self-selecting for the kinds of mutations they want to be around in others.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because it's like I find myself being selective as to who I want to be around or who I want to express my melancholy to. And I think sometimes I probably come off as very shy or um, even just aloof, but it's more just that I'm very specific about who and what I'm going to express my melancholy to. So that makes a lot of sense.
Did you see this question about your 36?
Let's see.
The 36-4 being your design sun and people wondering how that mixes into your experiences of melancholy.
Yeah, so I guess if I were to try to conceptualize that, it would come across as um, kind of this desire to have a new experience. And I think sometimes I can think that a new experience will somehow get rid of the melancholy, but I don't know that that's necessarily what I need. I think that's just kind of like a conclusion that my mind comes to with that. Um, or that it's a conflict that's causing the melancholy or it's I find that my mind treats melancholy really similar to my emotional wave. It just tries to like make sense of it and try to come to a conclusion as to why I'm experiencing it when there's no rhyme or reason, but the mind's really cute that it tries to do that all the time. So I think it just kind of like adds a different flavor to that.
Hmm. I've got some more kind of like sidebar kind of questions, but is there anything else that you were hoping that we would get to today?
Oh no, I'm just flowing. So whatever you got, I'm here for.
Cool. Okay. Well, this one's a little far out. This is like something that Jonah said a few times, where there's this sort of like natural affinity or sort of natural support between like collective logic and tribal and collective abstract and individual. And it is. And again, like, because I try to be a little bit skeptical of this because I don't know if this is my own wiring, I don't know if this is my differentiation or whatever, but to me, it is kind of obvious the inherent awkwardness of like talking about melancholy like with logic brain and using the logic circuitry to approach melancholy, and how kind of obvious the sort of treatment of melancholy appears by comparison when you approach it in these what we would consider like collective abstract ways, like attaching images to it, doing the whatever, doing the juiciness of the abstract process, right? The like, because again, it's like when we talk about these stereotypical treatments of melancholy that involve being in the art studio or going to stare at the sea or whatever, these are all kind of on that abstract experiential side, even though this is individual circuitry we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's why if you're listening to your mind when you're in melancholy, it's going to give you like all these solutions based upon your past experiences. And I think I was talking about that at the top of this, but how my mind will be like, well, last time you were in melancholy, you painted and that was exactly what you needed. Why isn't that working for you right now? Or
Yeah.
why isn't playing your guitar and singing working for you right now? And it's because I'm listening to my mind and trying these things and then getting frustrated because none of it is the correct thing for me. And so, yeah, I think what's been helpful for me is just being really open-minded to the melancholy and getting curious about it versus trying to write it a prescription.
Yeah, yeah. Logic is definitely trying to hand you a recipe, right? It's like, oh,
Yes.
I know what'll help. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, this has helped you before, and well, this is a completely new mood. This is a new, like, what is mutation in and of itself? It's new. So, sometimes those things might hit and sometimes those things might be correct, but it's not going to be the same experience that I had before. Like when I first got into painting again, I was really into painting landscapes and it was so satisfying for me to paint landscapes. And then one day I didn't want to paint landscapes anymore and I wanted to paint abstract and whatever. And so even within an activity, the activity could change and the mind has a tendency to judge that and say, well, but this is the thing that you're working on, or like it's like the mind wants to capitalize off of my melancholy and like try to turn it into a useful skill or something. And I'm just like, no, that's not what this is for.
How can we make this productive?
Yes, exactly. Especially with a wide open ego like me, it's like, okay, well, how can you use this time how can you be useful in this time?
Yeah, so much. There also does seem to be this sort of link between individuality and like disorder or whatever, like that, like for mutation to really happen, like for something to be truly new, like it has to be kind of broken apart into many parts. It has to be in a state of chaos or whatever. It's like I always use the metaphor of like, I don't know, disassembling a sand castle or a Lego castle or something. And the more you disassemble it, the more pieces you have to build something different.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, it's like it is chaotic, and I sometimes see myself as like a tornado, especially when I'm in melancholy and I am looking for the right thing. It's like I'm trying all these different things and seeing if it's fitting the mood or not, and it can just be pure chaos if the outside was watching me.
Yeah, it's like when I'm trying to put together a course on like melancholy and mutation right now, and it is funny. Like again, like try as soon as you like start trying to design a curriculum, you're like a little bit in like logic world, right? And so
Hmm.
it's funny because like what I'm advising or whatever, or what I'm attempting to impart broadly is like treatments of again the sort of abstract process, like treatments of exposure to images that resonate or to music that really hits at that moment or to play. These things we've talked about are very much abstract experiential things. But then I'm still by offering that as advice, that's still a prescription in a way. It's like, oh, here's the order of operations for a melancholic episode. Like it's going to be different every time, but so it's just interesting because what it all it really is like I mean, I guess it's just an awareness habit, right? An awareness, a type of awareness capacity to build, really. But it's so easy to like dress that up as a procedure or as a recipe or piece of what was the word you used? Uh, Somewhere between recipe and procedure. You had a good one that
Oh,
was very evocative.
prescription.
Prescription, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, though, from what you're describing, I think that's a good starting point for a lot of people because I feel like listening to your talk about this, it did kind of feel prescriptive, but not in a bad way. It just felt like it gave me things to be accepting of and experiment with. So I feel like that can be a really good starting point for people who are not used to maybe leaning into their melancholy and needing to kind of have a starting point because I mean, it's the same with strategy and authority, right? That's like a very mental thing to first conceptualize. And then once you feel it and you witness it, it's different. But I think at first, sometimes people have to kind of have their minds on board and then they can just do their own thing and they'll understand the somatic sensations around melancholy and you'll start to have that conscious awareness and then your mind can become your ally in the process.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing to give people that as like a foundation, as long as people know that it might not always be necessary or it might mutate, of course, but I think that can be really helpful at the beginning. It's like how we give people things to experiment with strategy and authority, like, oh, you're a generator and these are things you can practice with response. And, after a while, it is just going to be something that you witness and it happens. But at first, it might need to be a little bit more mental.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Like with everything, you're given the conditioning about it so that you can decondition from that conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like the cool thing about people in human design, for the most part, people know that, and that's what we encourage, is finding your own way. And so we're just giving suggestions and things to pay attention to. But I think that's super valuable to have just that awareness from somebody else's experience.
Mm.
Yeah. And
And
something, what were you
oh,
gonna
go
say?
on. No, please
Oh, I
go
was gonna
on.
say something that I've noticed is like, when I was little, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I think the psychological world is just kind of funny knowing human design now, because my dad's a psychologist. And so I grew up with all of that lingo. And I feel like it's kind of painted as a problem. It's like what's in the word disorder, right? Um, and it's funny thinking that you could have disorders and have a ton of individual channels because there is
Mm.
disorder in those channels. So it's almost like accepting that disorder. But something that I was reflecting on earlier was how I have quote unquote hyperfixations. And thinking back, I'm like, oh, I think those hyperfixations were just because I was in a period of melancholy and mutating. And whatever it was that I was hyperfixating on was exactly what I needed in that moment. And people with ADHD kind of
Mm.
joke that we have like a hobby graveyard, because we'll start something and it's giving us like a high or whatever because it's a new thing. And I'm sure psychology has its own conclusions drawn to this, but just reflecting on my own process, I'm like, oh, I feel like when I start a new hobby or a new activity or whatever, it's because I was in a very specific mood. And that's the thing that I needed for that mood. And I have no shame around just dropping it afterwards because, I could be obsessed with something for even a couple weeks if I'm really in a big shift, but there's no shame in just it going away afterwards if I don't need it anymore.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I love that graveyard metaphor, and because it's like it's like a crutch or whatever that helps you along one stage of the process, and then you don't need it anymore. You don't need that tool. You don't need that side of yourself reflected after the mutation is complete or whatever, because you are. It's in a way, it's like you already contain it now.
Yeah.
Once you've seen a movie, for instance, it's like you then carry that movie with you, until who knows, maybe after 7 years you you lose these things in some way or whatever. But for at least a number of years, it's like every thing that happens to you that becomes part of your like, surrounding world, part of your individuality, part of your individual circuitry, something you're familiar with enough that it's like an extension of yourself. When
Yeah,
it
for
reaches a
sure.
certain when it reaches a certain point of integration, it's like you no longer need the external representation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost just like liking different styles of music and having like your style evolve and all kinds of things.
Totally.
And yeah, and I would even think like for me, it's been kind of helpful to have a hobby graveyard because it's like I just kind of shove it all in a closet, and then that's kind of one of the prescriptive things about my melancholy is I'll just look in there and be like, is anything in here going to suit my mood right now? And if not, that's cool too. I'm not going to try to force it because in the past that hasn't worked, but it's actually been kind of helpful. Whereas I think sometimes we look at that as a negative thing, like, man, why was I obsessed with this thing for a week and now I don't want anything to do with it? But it might come in handy at some point. Who knows?
Mm. Yeah, it's funny to think, like, we know from the G center and the magnetic monopole and the fractal line and all this kind of stuff that what the identity really is, what the self really is like this long worm, this like, long dragon or whatever. And it's like I guess different sections of that dragon are painted differently or adorned differently. There's only maybe these couple of years of this dragon that are, painted red or that have this thing attached to it or whatever.
I love that analogy. That's so good.
I've got another analogy inspired by Jonah here. He said, melancholy is definitely related to creativity, the withdrawal of libido from outer objects to the inner that often comes before a big creative breakthrough. That's definitely true and reminds me of a comment on an old Earl Sweatshirt YouTube video. Someone was like, when a rapper looks homeless, you know he's about to release a fire album. But that's true for all
That's
artists. Yeah. When the disorder like arises in the life in these really conspicuous ways. For me, it shows up as in my house a lot. Like my house just looks extra trash like right before I'm about to have some sort of creative breakthrough.
wow, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. It's like it's like none of it is important because your body is so in the moment with the melancholy, and the mutation is all that matters. So a lot of things in the material world just don't matter as much. They don't have as much weight.
Mm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There because there it's that inward investment again. Like some like all that energy is being redirected to an interior process that we like don't even get to be witness to. It's just like the symptom of that energy not going towards other things tells us that it's happening. But like what is that? What's actually being built in there? I don't know. It's like we never really get to find out.
Right. And yeah, the talk about creativity in here. Before I found human design, I talked to some psychic randomly. And I think at the time I was really trying to force a music career. I was in a band and I was gigging at restaurants and I was having a pretty hard time with it because it just didn't really feel true to me to be like learning, all these covers and having to perform when I'm not in the mood to do that and to also make money doing it. And I remember her saying, for you, your creativity is not something that can be monetized. Like your creativity is just meant for you. And if you tie it to money or like productivity in any way, like it's just going to make you suffer. And I think what she was picking up on was probably all of my individuality and the
Mm.
melancholy because once she gave me that permission slip, and I guess I just needed to hear it from somebody outside of me because my mind was really trying to force it to happen. But I'm so inconsistent with those things. And truthfully, I do them for selfish purposes to move through the melancholy. And it's not because I feel like I need to have a creative contribution to the world or whatever. I have the hanging one, but I don't have the eight. And so it's very much my own thing that I don't want any pressure on. Like I don't want somebody kind of waiting on my creativity for a deadline or something that is forced. So yeah, my muse is not. I think that's even a keynote. My husband has it. I think it's gate one, line one, maybe, where it's like creativity is separate from will or something. Because he's also a musician and he has like most of the integration circuitry, and he has gate one, and I've noticed that with him, his best work just comes randomly. And when his band used to be signed to a label and they would have to meet deadlines and whatnot. And he would be in such a state of suffering trying to force the music to come out. And some of his best work has come from him having, a very intense emotional experience and then processing it through his creativity. But then he tries to recreate that when it's on somebody else's timeline, and it creates so much suffering. So I really kind of feel for artists that are professional and making money off of it. To me, I think maybe certain people are designed to like create a product out of music or whatever creativity, but it just doesn't work that way for me.
This keynote of 1-1 is pretty interesting that Jonah posted. Creation is
Yes.
independent of will.
Yeah, timing is everything, self-expression, which has its special timing. Yeah. And it was funny because my husband was basically venting to me about this one day of like, I just can't force it. Feeling like I'm forcing it. Like my best work has just come out of me randomly when the right timing strikes. And I just had an intuition to look up his keynotes, and
Hmm.
that's his gate one. And I'm like, oh,
Oh.
this is kind of what you're learning about your creativity is you can't, and he has a defined ego. So it can be really easy to try to just will his way through with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like just like catching the light or something, if what we're doing is filtering these neutrinos, then it is just this like right place, right time, being privileged to filter the thing that really shows yourself to yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think my gate one is in line two. So, I mean, just from what I know about the second line, that makes sense to me too, where it's like it just kind of has to come out, and it's more when I'm alone and I'm just kind of messing around and having fun with it and not really trying to do it a specific way.
We're being poked to talk about individual versus integration. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's the question of integration. Melancholy is definitely something that I've heard a number of perspectives on. Some people say that integration doesn't have melancholy at all, but you still see the like self-absorption and antisocialness and some of these melancholic symptoms that very much look like melancholy from the outside. I don't have a consistent integration channel, just a hanging 10, so my experience of it is pretty intermittent. But do you have any where do you have experiences from your own life or ways of working with that with clients?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at some of Nathan's keynotes here, and we already kind of talked about that 10-20. And I would say, you know, those feel true for me, like what he has here about the 20 and the 10. But it's definitely not the dominant melancholy for me. I notice the other ones carry a lot more weight. So maybe there's something to that of like, um, there's more of a moodiness to the other frequencies that I have versus that one. And my husband doesn't have any other individual channels other than his integration. And I mean, obviously, like I'm just much more of a moody person than he is, but I do notice it with him where he gets like agitated about certain things, and he'll just, it just doesn't seem as intense, I guess.
Less intense. Interesting. We've got word from Raw, courtesy of Mark here. Mark says that Raw describes them as melancholy. Yeah, that's my assumption too. I mean, because to me, it's obvious. Like the main evolutionary difference of integration is that it mutates and evolves, but it's not creatively evolving, right? It's like all this other individual circuitry that's introducing novelty and that's like playfully adapting, right? Whereas integration is just adapting only in response, only for the sake of survival, only to have continuity of the form or whatever. Um, but nature isn't just evolving for the sake of survival. Like all these forms are also obviously very playful and trying out different things and expressing themselves. And to me, that's what all the individual circuitry is. But the integration still mutates, so you'd think it would still be melancholy. It's
Yeah,
just
I
like
always think so.
yeah, it's just like I don't, I don't know. Yeah, I wish that I had more access to it personally because I bet the type of antisocial that it makes you probably feels pretty different from the inside. Because from the outside, it just looks the same. Like all the integration people in my life, when they get melancholic, it looks like any other melancholy. But um, I would imagine the
Yeah.
internal experience is different.
Yeah, I've noticed with my husband because he has 10-20 and 20-34. So he doesn't have a 57, but he describes his experience of being like very antsy. So I wonder if it's almost
Mm,
melancholy about not having anything to be busy with, like for the 20-34.
mm,
And I know Nathan put frustration about not being able to use one's power in the now. And that's kind of what I witnessed with him, where he'll just be pacing around the house and it's like he's looking for something to scratch the itch, but he doesn't have anything to be busy with. And things that would normally busy him are not doing it. So he's just kind of
mm.
pacing.
If we were to review like everything that you've said about your four channels like so far in this conversation, the 1020 does kind of stand apart a little bit too as being like the least romantic one. And like obviously compared to the two solar plexus ones, we would expect that to be the case. But even like the way you're talking about the 3828, you can sort of hear the like creative mutation in it. You can hear like even just the idea of there being a fighter who doesn't have something to fight for or whatever, like is this romantic idea compared to the 1020, which is just sort of annoyed that it's in the wrong place, you know? There's just not a lot of flavor around integration melancholy, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's very in the present, and it's um yeah, I mean it's more geared towards survival, I guess. So
Jody
I'm
really
open
just
to
I feel like Jonah should really just get on voice with some of these interesting observations that he's got.
I know, Joni, you've had a lot to contribute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm at the cafe right now, so I don't want to be, I don't want to be too obnoxious to them, or there's also music on in the background. I'm not sure what people can hear, but no, this is just a great topic, and I've just kind of, I've just had some thoughts come up, and it's been a really active chat. I think I'm just excited how lively the chat's been.
I love that everybody's pumped about this topic. It's cool.
It does feel like something that's underexplored and that needs like a lot of I don't know, that is subject to mutation, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny that you have the 6124 and your talk really sparked all of this. It's, inspiring my open head to think about things that are correct for me to think about, and so it's like you're inspiring the mutative thought around all of this, which is cool to watch.
Hmm. There's just a piece of trivia I noticed the other day too. There's a symmetry between the 6124 and the 63. They're both they're the same amino acids involved, isoleucine to leucine. So one of each of those pairs is isoleucine and the other is leucine. So that's it's interesting that just like amino acid wise, they're like an isomorphic channel.
Oh, that's cool.
And then weirdly, so this is just one. I don't know anything about this like whole genetic side of human design. I'm just like noticing some funny little patterns. Also, the two individual channels that we're like guaranteed to have every year, the 3420 and the 4323, both of those ones are asparagine to leucine. So
Oh,
leucine. So you could think about these four that I just named as sort of like kind of cardinal individual channels, and it's funny that they all involve leucine.
that is interesting. It would be interesting if like we start seeing that, people in the health and wellness space are encouraging people to like supplement with that or something.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that when it happens. Let's,
Do you have an undefined 55? Take the supplement, and it'll. Sorry, I just had to.
really.
No, that's exactly what I was thinking because I feel like collective health advice, you can really see it kind of reflected in the transits.
Yeah,
Do you suffer from undefined? No, I'm sorry.
speaking of prescribing for the mood, that's very literal.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Yeah, Casey brought up a good point. It'll be interesting to see how the melancholy is perceived in the background frequency.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have individual gates in the current cycle, but yeah, I guess because we have that whole channel, that'll be so different.
Yeah, maybe just everybody being melancholic about survival or
Right.
wanting to be busy, not knowing what to be busy with.
Yeah, those are let's see, the keynote of 34 was frustration about not being able to use one's power in the now. That's like
Yeah.
so specific and wordy. Um, and the 20 we already looked at, the discomfort with things as they are.
Yeah. Wow.
It does sound kind of somber from our current perspective, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
But again, it's like it's not appropriate for us to be there yet. We're still a few years out. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's surprising how differently you can feel about something years on the horizon, in advance of it, because you're not there yet, because you're not designed to be there yet. The chemistry that you're making internally to consider the things we're considering is not the chemistry that we'll have when the time comes.
I think that's a really good point for everybody who kind of gets tripped up about 2027 because I think when we let our minds latch on to what if it looks like this or what if it looks like that, it can cause some internal chaos. But yeah, what you just brought up makes a lot of sense. We can't really conceptualize it because we're not in it, so we don't know what it's going to be like.
Mm. I bet, I bet AI stuff will probably be, this is such a random thought. I have no idea where this is coming from, but I bet AI stuff will be useful for like contending with melancholy. I mean, I think it already is, just the fact
Yeah,
that you can give a prompt and get something, whether that something is a piece of music or a piece of art or the writing that AI can do, like any of the stuff that AI can do. It's like it's always going to lack the humanity, which I think is what the individual is really looking for. But it's like still, even an AI created image can like suggest to you an elaboration of the affect that you're currently in. So even if like the image that it's giving can't solve it for you or whatever, or really speak to it, or really be that balm that a human creative spirit can provide, it can at least sort of flesh it out through suggestion, and it give you a sense of what the first step is to take, because so often melancholy can just like, you have no idea where to even start with your mood,
oh yeah,
where
absolutely.
what during those times where it's like only the hyper specific thing will hit, it just sometimes it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. There's just like nothing that appeals.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I mean, I don't know how you feel about AI as a projector, but you know, we're going to be experiencing kind of the rise of the projector, and I don't think it's a coincidence that we're experiencing the rise of AI, because I actually think if you use AI as a tool, it can create a lot of efficiency. So I'm like, did projectors create AI to create efficiency? And I feel like
Mm.
you can use it for a lot of different things, like you just said. I mean, I'm writing a book right now, and ChatGPT helped me write my book outline and just saved me from all of this, like, sitting around and just kind of waiting for it to come through. It gave me something to respond to and to then make it my own. But I think it can be
Mm.
a really useful tool for certain things.
It's funny that everyone's kind of just intuitively been practicing being curators for a while too. It's like the idea of a mood board is such a recent phenomenon, and is like something that, I don't know, more and more people are kind of can't help but practice just like incidentally. People are just like in this habit now of collecting things or aggregating things or whatever. And it's not always as obvious as like a super intentional, curated Pinterest or Tumblr or something like that, or like a physical mood board. But like, we are exposed to so many images these days that, a lot of the times people just like have some folder on their phone or whatever that's like, these things go together for, and they don't know what they're doing when they start assembling these things. But it's becoming more and more of a habit, just sort of like in between more serious enterprises.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, to answer Ashley's question really quick, my book is about, well, it's a fictional book actually. Megan Edwards has created a publishing company called Sleeping Phoenix Publishing, and it's going to be a way for people in human design to express creativity like within the realms of human design. So it's a fictional book that's going to have all of the characters' charts in the back. And
Cool.
yeah, it's I just think about what I would want to read as a human design nerd that also really enjoys reading fiction. And so anybody will be able to read it, but then for the human design nerds, they'll be able to, kind of analyze the characters based upon their charts. So it's based loosely around my life. I am personal view and obviously lots of individuals, so it's going to have my own flavor, but it's basically just about a character that unknowingly kind of joins a cult and then finds her inner authority throughout that process. And, it's meant to be very empowering to people who have maybe been in culty situations and are discovering themselves along that path. So yeah, it's been fun to write so far. I'm excited to see how it turns out.
Whoa. How are you making the charts?
A lot of the characters are based upon people in my life. So I'm inspired by people in my life and I've used some of their charts other times. There's been a few times where like I've had a client and their chart was exactly the chart that I wanted for a certain character. So it's almost like the character was already formed in my mind, and then I saw somebody's chart and I'm like, that's the character. So it's been kind of a combination of things. It's like if there's a character in the book that's very loosely based upon somebody in my life, I'm just using their chart and then just kind of seeing how that character is formed. And then
Hmm.
yeah, other times I just see the chart and I'm like, oh, that's the character. So it's been cool to
Wow.
experiment with that too. Yeah, I mean it's very uncharted territory. So like I don't know if anybody's ever written a book like this, but Ashley was saying J.K. Rowling cast birth charts for her characters. Okay, so that's really similar to what I'm doing then. That's awesome.
So all these charts have happened in reality too?
For my book?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the main
Cool.
character has my chart. So I mean she's gonna be a little different than me, but yeah, they're all in reality for the most part. At least at the very least I've had a session with somebody or it's been one of my clients. So
That'd be really crazy to just find, have an idea about a character and then like scour time for when such a person would have been born.
I
And
was
even
trying
weird,
to do that.
really. And then
Yeah, it
even,
wasn't working.
like, could you imagine then, and also just like being so good at human design or whatever, like writing that character so realistically that someone like who actually lived that, like reads it and they're like, how did this author know about my life?
Oh man, I hope that's what happens. I mean, I hope that people who are into human design will be able to see the charts and be like, wow, I can really see myself in that character. I can see that channel that I share with them and it'll create a different relatability. Um, so yeah, it's really interesting to go about it. My mind has kind of been like, what the fuck are we doing? But I'm having so much fun with it because it's just so different. Such a different way to create. Hey Jonah, maybe you'll make it into my book. We'll see. I love character development, so a lot of the book is centered around different characters, and I just think it's a fun way to learn human design too. That's kind of with an abstract channel in my mind. I feel like I learn really well through story and through osmosis, and maybe that's my right variables as well. And so I was just thinking, if I were to have just found human design, what would be a really cool way to learn about it and actually see it play out in a creative way versus, as much as I love reading the Ravy Ching and all of that, sometimes it can be really dry and it can be hard to actually see it play out in real life. So
Yeah, juicy story-based abstract experiential version of developing human design sufficiency or whatever. Cool.
yeah.
Um, Another little piece of individual circuitry trivia I noticed is that Hades, the next godhead, is all individual gates. Um, and I believe maybe Maya is too, or Maya is like a lot of them, and those are opposed from each other. So it's like those two seasons of the year, Hades and Maya, because also the Earth would obviously be in the opposite. You're just getting inundated with individuality time. And we're used to that like being a theme of like the quarter mutation in general, but after Hades, I think Prometheus is like mostly or all collective gates with no individual.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But something else that just occurred to me is how well Minerva, our current, the godhead that we're in at this moment, kind of really prepares us for Hades by activating these four splenic gates in a row. Um, you kind of she kind of like tunes the body, like the physical structure of the body or whatever, and to be able to handle the mutation that comes, right? So it is funny that this like famous splenic season directly precedes like all this individuality. Oh, thanks,
Wow,
Mark, for
that's a really
posting
good
the
point.
wheel there.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. I was thinking about how I'm noticing how a theme that is in October is like, because I work in a bar, so I hear about this, but like sober October, people stopping drinking for October
Mm.
and people just talking a lot about health things, like starting new health regimens. And like this is just a big topic that I'm witnessing. So it seems like people are unconsciously preparing their bodies in some way and in their own way, you know?
Nice. Oh yeah, Maya is fully individual too. So yeah, every year during the season of Maya and the season of Hades, both the sun and earth are exclusively in individual gates for whatever 24 days.
Wow. That's fascinating.
And I guess those are also the godheads that then just like kind of inaugurate those whole hemispheres, right? Because Hades is not only the first godhead of mutation, it's like that whole hemisphere of Yang at the base. And then Maya obviously kickstarts this whole hemisphere of Yin at the base.
Oh, yeah.
Huh. Well, were there any other individuality topics on your mind?
I feel pretty complete unless anybody has any other questions.
How do you have you felt that your relationship to loneliness specifically has changed since being more in the experiment?
Oh, yeah. I've heard people talk about how they will sometimes experience, like your profile will sometimes experience one side more than the other. And I know it's typical that you kind of lean into the conscious side, but before human design, I was actually much more in my fourth line, I would say, and
Mm.
more extroverted and outward. And I would actually really try to avoid alone time. I didn't like being alone. I think I was afraid of what would come up. I almost was avoiding the melancholy and avoiding the mutation. Um, so, I always have had really social jobs and always have had lots of friends and would just kind of busy myself with my social life. And ever since the experiment, I mean, and also like after 2020, my whole life changed, but I feel like I relish in it now. I really enjoy my alone time and I've found a really good balance between being alone and being with friends. But loneliness isn't something I'm necessarily afraid of anymore. Whereas before, I feel like I was kind of avoiding it at all costs.
Mm.
What about you, Mike? How do you feel about loneliness?
I love it now.
I mean, you're 6'2", right, on the roof?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
probably,
mean, yeah, and I don't even just mean being alone. Like being alone I've liked for a long time, but loneliness specifically, the sort of existential pain of loneliness I've come to really enjoy, which is kind of a weird. It's kind of, I mean, it kind of circles back to something you said really early in this conversation about just like um how the relationship between accepting and the viability of the mutation, and if you
mm,
let it happen, these things that you think no way is this going to be sweet somehow become very sweet.
yeah, yeah, I love that. Um, that gives me some hope there too, because it's cool hearing about somebody else really accepting that and relishing it and embracing it.
I I think I might be a little melancholic right now too, because like when we have silences during this conversation, I'm just like so like I might as well be in a jacuzzi when this conversation gets silent. And this has nothing to do with what you're sharing. I'm totally enjoying what you're sharing and everything, but when like a silence, like period of silence, like weighs on you like a blanket, when silence feels like imminent, you know that's a mutative silence, like silence can
Mm,
feel so empty and silence can feel just so like volume,
mm,
like it has mass to it. And every silence during this conversation has felt like it's had so much mass, and I'm just like, ah, yes, like change,
yes.
something changing within. At last.
I love that. That's such a beautiful way to describe it. Yeah, I was relishing in the silences too. It feels like you're just kind of sinking into it.
Yeah, in the same way that like the going to stare at the sea or walk in the forest is the classic romantic version of mutation is like in a way it's like to get to be in the most neutral place possible because your your mutation is especially acute if you're like looking at a tree and getting pissed off about it, right? Typically that's like a safe place to go because it's like when there's no human intervention there's no acculturation, there's no conditioning because like obviously it's auras that are going to be conditioning us the strongest, auras and transits, but it's also like the results of auras as objects or the results of transits as objects. Like the way that a home is designed or even a piece of furniture is designed is also shaped by a person's conditioning and is somehow emanating that condition just in terms of design by us being witness to it, so it's like
Mm,
so if you're really in the natural environment there's like such a little risk of that happening. Like the only like imprints on the Maya you're seeing are creatures with their nests and their desire paths through brush and like things like that. um
yeah.
and so in the same way it's like silence just by virtue of it not containing any contrivance of culture of the mental Maya. It's like just the refuge of that can be such a balm.
Totally. Yeah. And like when you're in a certain space, the right kind of silence, you know,
All
is,
right, silence.
it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you even need the right silence.
I'm also like so into just like especially in a melancholic mood, protesting other people's pointless talking by being like
Hmm.
extra silent. Like I mean that's like
Yeah.
half a joke because I'm like not doing it for that reason, but that's kind of what it ends up feeling like because you can tell that it provokes them. And maybe that's my whatever design Jupiter in 39, but
Yeah. I can definitely relate to that. Like, I'm just not going to participate because this is pointless.
yeah, and insisting on the purity of the silence.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, it seems like we don't have any more questions in the chat.
Nice. I love that.
Cool.
I love that for us. I love
Yeah, I love that.
I love silence. I love no comment.
We can just go sit in our melancholy now. So
This is
good. Well,
such
thank
a,
you
it's
so much.
yeah, thank you. I love this format for talking about melancholy.
I was kind of nervous about the Discord because I'd never done this, and it's like I think I saw it was a third line day, and I was like, oh God, I hope I don't fuck this up. But I actually really enjoyed this. It was nice to just like sit in my room and talk at the wall.
Yes, thanks for being in this mood.
Yeah, absolutely. Great for moodiness. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening and participating so much. And I look forward to getting to know all of you more throughout Signpost. I'm really loving what you guys are creating here.
Yes, goodbye everybody.
Bye.